Welcome back to the Daily Factor. Now, yesterday, Donald Rumsfeld, the two-time U.S. Defense Secretary, who was one of the main architects of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, had died at the age of 88. Now, to discuss Donald Rumsfeld, I'd like to welcome Brooks Spector, former U.S. diplomat and associate editor of the Daily Maverick. Brooks, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Brooks, Donald Rumsfeld, we have 9/11 happening, and this is where we see him really coming to the fore, along with then President George Bush, in really, being the man behind those invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Well, Donald Rumsfeld's history is actually more interesting, more complex, and much lengthier in the public arena than just 9/11 and its aftermath. And he's one of the last people around who had a significant role in Richard Nixon's administration, and that goes back quite a ways. And then in the administration of the short administration of Gerald Ford, who had succeeded Nixon when he resigned, Donald Rumsfeld became Secretary of Defense for the first time and was therefore the youngest Secretary of Defense. And he came back much later, of course, in the Bush administration, Bush II, that is, George W. Bush, where along the way he had been responsible for pushing very hard to get the military to be less bureaucratic, more mobile units which could be moved more quickly and more agilely. And to that extent, he gets good marks as a manager and as a leader of a bureaucratic revolution, and even canceling several weapon systems that were becoming even more outrageously costly than most of them do, and with very little in the way of serious progress. But then, of course, there was 9/11, there was the incursion and later the large-scale invasion of Afghanistan, and then Iraq in the subsequent time, 2003. And Donald Rumsfeld became the champion, the lightning rod for much of that. And at one point, just after the invasion of Iraq, he had said, well, this is going to be, I can't say whether it'll be a week or two or three, but it'll be quick. And of course, it wasn't. And if you follow the news, the US troops are now, the last of them are now leaving Afghanistan after what is effectively a 19-plus-year period, with realistically not a great deal to show for it, with a government there which is buckling under the pressure of the resurgent Taliban. Rumsfeld, if we think of him in literary terms, he actually wrote several interesting books about being in government, but he's probably best known to the general public for coining the phrase known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And by this, he meant that you can figure some things out, and you have to assume that some things you don't know are going to happen, but you can at least predict the range of them. But then there are those other things, the black swan events, that there's really no way to predict and there's no way to know in advance, and you get caught by them. And I think it's probably fair to say that Rumsfeld's leadership came into serious question once it became clear that the country, the US, was bogged down now in not just one, but two wars, significant numbers of troops, massive amounts of money, large-scale use of all kinds of weapons. And the end result is an Iraq which is largely, not completely, but largely in sync with Iran, and an Afghanistan which, as we just said, is beginning to buckle under the pressure of a resurgent Taliban insurrection. So if we have to measure Donald Rumsfeld's success, we have to say he was probably a pretty good peacetime defense secretary. He was an excellent business manager. He's the man who brought you NutraSweet, among other things. But as a leader and as a thinker about strategic possibilities and ideas, If he were in my class, he might not get a passing grade.
No question, Brooks, and unfortunately, because time is against us, he was one of those who staunchly defended his record, and subsequently, after the Iraqi invasion, he had then resigned 2 years, of course, before President George Bush had finished his second term.
That's correct. There was a lot of pressure at that point because it was quite clear that the promised delivery of success in both of those theaters of war was never going to come about within the next 2 years of what was left of the Bush administration. Just one other footnote: he spent some years in Congress as a young elected member from the state of Illinois, and he was one of the few Republicans at the time who pushed hard for civil rights legislation. He was not of the wing of the Republican Party that now effectively controls it. He was a very different sort of man in those terms. So there you go. There's the second good mark for him.
Well, at least he passes 2 marks in the school of Brooks Spector. Brooks, we say thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Take care.
Now, you take care. Also, Brooks Spector, Associate Editor of the Daily Maverick and former U.S. diplomat. After the break, we will be discussing community news and a good project that is happening with regards to 4 Souls Bakery and its foundation. Stay tuned.